Hello, my name's Grant, and as you can probably tell, I am currently substitute teaching right now, so that is why the background is a little weird. But today I am talking about America's God from Jonathan Edwards to Abraham Lincoln by Mark A. Noll, specifically Chapter 5, talking about Christian republicanism. Now, what this was, Christian republicanism was best described by Gordon S. Wood in the book Classical Republicanism and the American Revolution. He states that republicanism was the ideology of the American Revolution. It has such become the source of what we Americans still believe, the source of many of our noblest ideas and persistent values. Another way to look at it is through the founding fathers, who say republicanism represented more than just a particular form of government. It was a life, it was a core ideology. It was a uncompromising commitment to liberty. From the mid 1400s, Protestants actively believed and embraced Republican ideals. Doing so, they brought in linguistic conversations. They brought in habits of thought. They brought in all these different ideals from republicanism into their traditional theology. Another person that brought Republican ideals into Christianity was George Whitefield. George Whitefield was a major part of the Great Awakening. His speeches basically broke all traditional rules of sermons at that time, basically saying that you do not need a formal education or a good role or a good be very prestigious. However, what you need is an active commitment to God. Another person that was influential in republicanism was George Washington himself. In the book George Washington and the French and Indian War by J. Marshall, George Washington, he says that George Washington was a devout republicanism person. He was devout to the idea of republicanism and its civic virtue. By the early decades of the 19th century, it had become a matter of routine for Americans who believe in God and who are Christians to speak of Christianity and Republican values with a single voice. Fast forward a few years to the 1750s, the French and Indian War begins to break out. The war with France accelerates the integration of republicanism in political philosophy and Christian thought. It was the main person of that was Samuel Davies from Virginia, who preached that he preached several war-stirring sermons that addressed theology in the garments of what was later realized as a Republican sermon. I mentioned earlier about the term virtue. Virtue back then was something of a conflicting meaning. Most of the founding fathers thought that virtue, in classical terms, meant that it was a service to the common good. Most Americans also instead believed that it was life guided by God's will and personal domestic devotion. So there was two separate ideals that the term virtue meant. So there was the American political ideal, which was it was to serve the common good, and there was the American religious ideal, which was it was a devotion to God, and it was a life guided by God. The ambiguity of this meaning of virtue provided the flexibility necessary for religious believers to become full participants in the American national drama, and for American national drama to become incorporated into the powers of redemption. There's a quote by Alexis de Tocqueville. I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that last name. I apologize to Alexis. He says that two perfectly distinct elements that elsewhere have often made war with each other, but which in America they have succeeded in incorporating somehow into another by combining marvelously. I mean to speak of the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom. So what he's saying is that these ideas should be opposing ideas, but instead, in this time in this country, somehow it's working. Um, to sum up and to conclude, I would like to say that I personally I've always gotten weirded out by church in or politics in church, but these politics in church that they're talking about are much less agenda based and much less focused on modern day Republican um, problems and ideas. These Christians and politicians, what they're bringing into it is an idea of serving the American people with freedom, giving them the ideas of freedom and how uh, God can give you freedom and give you liberty at the same time. And so can America. It can give you freedom, it can give you liberty. So a combination of God and America and what their idea and core values represent is really what these men like George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards are trying to get at in their sermons and their teachings. And so, yes, overall, I thought this was very interesting. I thought that this was very knowledgeable, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Thanks.